I'm Dane Rose, and let's begin by talking about the risks of what I'm about to talk to. I'd say the biggest risk is that uh, it transfers attention away for you as the patient or the client and towards me as a healer, mentor, professional, teacher, etc. And that's not a good idea. It's very important to attune to your soul, to your spirit, to what lights you up, and to stay focused on that. Now, here's why I'm going to do it, which is the reason it's very beneficial. I've spent well over $250,000 on a personal growth journey over the years, and there's never going to be, for the most part, you're probably not going to meet healers, teachers, professionals that tell you that they're terrible people, that tell you that they don't know what they're doing, that tell you to go spend your money and your time somewhere else. And yet, in at least a third of these experiences, I've paid money to get worse. Now, there's a number of different ways you can get worse. One is, if you're doing something constructive with your time, attention, and money, and you have an idea that traveling to this place, doing this workshop, etc., is constructive, but it's not, or it's not as constructive as what you're doing. You spend time, money, risk, and energy to take attention away from what you're doing and invest it in something that is not returning as strong a yield, as much well-being as what you're doing. Classic example, you go to some Primal Scream, workshop, and and you spend $1,000 and this and that, and you get in stuff with feelings, and you express those feelings, and you get fired by your boss, and and all this stuff, and an ice cream cone would have given you more enjoyment, than all of that. And so, there's the possibility of diversion. The second possibility is an area that I didn't understand how dangerous this is until recently. And it's the danger of blind spots and a lack of diagnosis. Now, here's what I mean. What I've learned in general in the healing profession is that people teach what they know, and it tends to be relatively narrow. So you go to a carpenter, and they know how to saw things and nail things. And if you need things sawn and nailed, you couldn't go to a better place. But if you take your iPhone to a carpenter, they know how to saw and nail things. And if they saw and nail your iPhone, you're in a much worse place. But here's where it gets really tricky. The healing profession, the healing landscape and paradigm within the myopia of materialistic Western culture is so underdeveloped, so unarticulated, so unintegrated with the culture that, first of all, and this is a fun thing you can explore if you want to waste a lot of money, if you talk with 5 different psychics, they're all going to say something different. If you talk with one psychic and what they say doesn't come to pass, and then they don't give you a refund or say, we were full of shit. It's a little bit more fluid than that. The psychic that says, no, that's not the woman for you when you're happily married and love that woman, just says, well, we wish you well with that. And this has actually happened to me, where one healer, that this woman is the most amazing fit for your soul and luminous future. And, it's one of the worst disasters of my life, over a $60,000 expense and 2 months in hell. And they just carry right on, happily affirming what great soulmates we are. You get rid of that helpful psychic and, meet someone else, and I know this is not the woman for you. This is another, energy healer and psychic. It's the woman I'm happily married to. Not for me, apparently. So in those examples, you can see 100% false, 100% wrong, sending you off into, a nightmare in the one case, and if you'd listen to them, blocking bliss and, satisfaction on the other hand. So this is a really big call to personal responsibility. But this is not any fun in this culture when we do not know how to take responsibility. You see, had we started in grade school and high school and college, had we had emotionally literate partners in our college years, etc., had we been married to someone who knew how to speak the truth and, talk about things at a level of artistry. My body is needing this, my heart is needing this, my mind is needing this, my culture is needing this, these are my logistics, and this is the best fit, as opposed to, just volatilely acting like an insane and unintegrated person, then it would be intelligent for us to take personal responsibility. I think this is a case for a Z1. We've got a Z1 going here with a personality type here, and 98% of the time this approach is going to work here. Except we haven't learned what a Z1 is. We haven't learned about personality types. We don't know about our own personality. And as a result, we are just as in the dark as any of these absurd psychics. And, the one thing that a psychic or someone can give you in this situation when it goes wrong or goes south is you weren't to blame. Except you are, because you chose and hired and listened to the psychic. Which means you're damned if you listen to yourself and damned if you listen to someone else. Either way, you lose. This is a frustrating situation. And I don't want you to feel crazy, to come back to the reason I'm making these videos. I don't want you to feel crazy. I don't want you to feel that it's your fault that healers don't talk to each other, that there's no unified theory. There's no unified theory in physics. There's the atomic paradigms that seem to predict most things larger than an atom, and then there's the subatomic paradigm. And there's the search for the unified theory. We don't have it yet. And we don't have a unified theory in this field. Do the Jungians have it, or the Freudians? Or, what about the Osho folks, or the this, or the that? They don't agree. So you talk to 5 different psychics. They'll all give you different things. You talk with 5 different therapists. And there's a good chance, particularly if they're from different schools, that they're going to disagree. And so what do you do? And when is it better for you to spend money and pay anyone? For example, right now, my primary return on growth is teaching. And I say teaching, I should really just say making these videos. Having inspiration and capturing them on film is a primary form of growth. Another is investing in my marriage. and another is building a nonprofit. And I don't know any therapist, any healer, any travel, any drug that's going to give me a better return on growth than that at this time. At other times, I've invested 6 hours a week in therapy. I like 2-hour sessions. So, I would do 2 hours with this energy healer, 2 hours with this, therapist, and maybe 2 hours with this other energy healer. And these sessions, reflecting what I've just told you, would be completely different. And so this is another thing that, I want you to know. If you end up investing heavily in this field, as I have, you're going to learn that you end up knowing more than some of these healers and therapists if you're attentive. Because they don't go around having 6-hour-a-week sessions with various people, but you do. So they don't know what you know. They don't know the fact that, for example, I learned that one energy healer over the phone could clear back spasms. It's a useful thing to have if you're, like me, a contractor. Clear up back spasms that otherwise would leave me flat on my back for weeks. The same guy was not terribly honest, had money hang-ups, was incredibly bitter and blaming of his wife, who, he chose. And, he's this mystical energy healer. So this is another little, thing to unpack. Me, you, anyone else who gets into this field is flawed, human, imbalanced, and in many cases myopic. Myopic meaning we know what we know in our own little world, and we don't know what's going on anywhere else. For example, the healer that could clear up my back spasms, I can say that because I've tried 30 healers. And all of them at one time or another, I asked to help with my back spasms, and he was the best by a factor of 400%. Now, but here's the trouble. So I now know to go to him for physical ailments, and I now know that he can do them over the phone or in person. And of course, I now know that he's not very good at picking women, and I know that he's not very good with managing money. And I know that he's not very direct with his anger, So I know that because, I've paid him $20,000 to find this stuff out. Now, he doesn't know that because he hasn't gone to 30 healers and asked all 30 healers to come to him and give him feedback. He just says he's an energy healer. Well, so do hundreds and hundreds of other people say that they're just energy healers. You get the problem here. So I know that he's good at that. And then, I spent $100,000 with another, sometimes a wife and couple, a bioenergy balancing practitioner, Steve and Marianne Orsery. And, I worked with them. They're not as good at energy work, meaning the energy healer, I can clear it back. That's quite a phenomenal thing to be flat in your back and pick up the telephone and, be moving around again after an hour. That's a pretty phenomenal thing. I don't have that with Steve. But it's not black and white. There's some stuff. I'd say he's 20% as potent as John. But so why do I do, $100,000 with him and $20,000 with John? Well, there wasn't the marriage conflict. There wasn't the money tightness. A little more sense of humor. You see, and humor is part of the equation. You Norman Cousins, laughter can cure cancer. So this is also part of my point. You really are not in this illusionary polarity between spiritual and not spiritual. You want to know what brought me the most joy in one of my healing projects, which was a bucket list project? In my bucket list project, felt exhausted, chronic fatigue, didn't feel any reason to live, was more and more irritable. And I know that kind of impatient irritability is a symptom of pain. What am I going to do? Well, when you're doing 6 hours of therapy with 3 different practitioners a week, it's not logical to say, oh, we need to do 12 hours. It's already spending 20 grand a year. So, I mean, that's not a logical conclusion. 6 hours is I think, kind of a week is cutting it. You're kind of at the edge of, maxing that medium out. So I decided to take $30,000, make a bucket list of everything I wanted to do before I died. Everything I thought, if I left and never even tried that once, it's kind of missing. Maybe I'd regret it. And so I saw the Cirque du Soleil shows in Vegas. I went hang gliding. I jumped off a cliff paragliding. I jumped out of a plane, skydiving. I stayed at my favorite hotels in Vegas, the Wynn, of course. And I traveled to Asia for the first time and met an incredible travel companion. I just sent out a letter to 100 Filipinos and said, these are the conversations I like talking about. This is when I will be in the Philippines. And these are the activities I'd like to do. And if you'd enjoy coming along and engaging in this way, let's see where we can fit together. Wonderful, extraordinary 2 weeks of my life. And I wanted to go to Asia, before dying. And I wanted to dive through a tropical waterfall. Done. I wanted to write a book on local landscaping. Done. Did it. I wanted to write a user's manual, how to have great relationships with me. What to know, because there's 100 questions that nobody asks, but that are relevant to good flow and value. So, I wrote that. I wanted more house plans, so I got that. I wanted more fun media. So, my first big, flat screen connected with, streaming and Netflix and all that. So anyway, 30 items, a whole bucket list, done. I wanted an electric motorbike, done. I wanted a sailboat, done. So in this way, this bought 2 years. But the most amazing thing in this whole thing? The Traxxas VXL Stampede 4-wheel drive truck. Now, this almost got nixed. You notice most of the bucket lists were experiential, things that, going and doing something, writing something, making something happen. But the Traxxas VXL Stampede is a toy for my little boy, and a bit of an experiment. And I almost nixed it. Why? Because I bought it on Amazon, and when it arrived, costing all of $575, when it arrived, it said you cannot return this if you take it out of the box. And if you've ever bought toys at Toys R Us or anything like that, you know that these, $100 trucks and stuff, they miss an axle, So I nearly didn't even open it. But I did. And it was beyond my expectations. This thing is waterproof. This thing drives 65 miles per hour. This thing is built stronger than my pickup. And when I took it out into the local parks, children would chase it, kind of like a herd of geese or a Pied Piper, like 5 or 10 different 5, 6, 7, 8-year-olds just running behind the truck, essing this way, essing that, screaming, laughing, whippets racing 40 miles per hour. Of course, can't catch a 65-mile-an-hour truck. Whippets would go huge arcs, and their owners would say, "Thank you for giving my whippet a run." Wives would walk up to me and say, "Where can I get one of those for my husband or my boy?" Kids would come up. In other words, in this culture, in the United States, I found myself feeling connected to a whole subsection of people that I've never had anything to do with, number one. Number two, it was a feat of engineering. Number three, it was giving me exercise and taking me out into all my parks, so that I could drive through different streams and up and down pathways. This thing cost $600. It's still with me 8 years later. And dollar for dollar, this is worth, 4 months of many therapies that cost $10,000, So you kind of get the sense we're not dealing with this limited paradigm where, materialism and esoteric and, spiritual and No. What a healing journey is about, what a balancing and integrating journey is about, are intelligently investing time, money, energy, and thought in activities that either bring balance or imbalance. Now, as a heady and somewhat dissociative person who's done my own self-designed homeschooling program, done my own, spiritual journey, run my own company in my own way, I'm not connected with large sections of my own country and culture. And so this brought me back into connection in a certain way. All my life I've been told that's not what guys think, that's not what guys do, that's not what guys want, as if somehow I shouldn't be doing the things that are important to me because it doesn't fit the stereotype. Well, this is one of the few times in my life buying a 4-wheel drive 65 mile per hour radio control toy that everyone was happy, because that's what guys like in this country. And finally, I was behaving consistently with a stereotype. But there's a certain kind of integration. There's a certain kind of moving towards balance, in less in my head, more in my body, less isolated, more in community, less serious, playing more with children. And this is what healing is all about. It's about balance. That's all we're looking at. What we're looking at in the healing paradigm is you came in perfect, and then your parents and your family system and your family coping programs and the culture and the cultural system and the educational program knocked you way off center, put you into boxes in which you didn't belong, overdeveloped parts of you and completely ignored other parts of you. And in the process, you got out of whack. And the more out of whack you got, the more pain you experienced, the more energy it took to maintain that out of whack shape in which you were accepted and could function within the culture, but were not at ease. You were in dis-ease. So you came in perfect, you got knocked out of whack. And what a diagnosis is it articulates the pattern of your imbalance. So we could say we're leaning hard to the left here, right? That's a start. because now you know to balance yourself, to find healing, to heal the dis-ease, you've got to move towards balance. So you have a sense of the direction, but you need to know what specifically is asymmetrical within you and how you can act and still survive in this culture and bring yourself back to balance. That's all healing is. And you are whole again when you return to the spherical shape within which you arrived. Rather than being a highly chopped, lopsided energy, you're back into the spherical shape in which you arrived. That's what healing is. Now, the journey of healing is anything that rounds you out, that restores flow to chopped systems, mentally, emotionally, physically, and that balances your system. And with balance comes sustainability, renewability. That's what healing is. Anything that achieves that. And if psychotherapy achieves that, if reading a book achieves that, if putting the book down and going for a run achieves that, if eating this type of food or that type of food achieves that, if watching a documentary on this subject achieves that, if having a massage, if having an orgasm, if masturbating, if being in a relationship with multiple lovers, if spending time in Japan, if studying this topic achieves that movement of wholeness, then you're on a path of healing and wholeness. And if studying some part of science and math helps you integrate your intuition with your art, moving towards integrity and thus wholeness, if it helps you achieve that, it's moving towards healing and growth. It's moving towards grace, which is correlated with balance. And if it does not, if the psychics, if the yoga, if the special diet knocks you further off tilt, it's not on a healing path. Now, what's very interesting about all of this is that I'll give an example of my friend Andrew. Now, this is an example of how healing can be created in an indirect way. So, for example, we like rational lineal thoughts in our culture, and so indirect thoughts can be healing. They can balance things out. So everyone knows smoking cigars is bad for your health. So who's going to smoke a cigar on a healing journey, right? Well, you can say it yellows your teeth, it puts tar in your gums, it increases risk of cancer. Not the first choice for a healing path. But here's how the indirect process, the ecological process, see, because we're looking linear here. Western thought is linear and direct. Eastern thought, feminine thought, is circuitous and ecological. Now, what ecological means, you see, when the West brought rabbits to Australia, the direct things, do you like rabbits? Yes. Are they cute? Yes. Did they destroy the ecology of Australia? Yes. You see, when you think linear, you get too myopic. What you're really looking at is things that have an ecological nature. Now, here's two examples of the positive and healing aspects of cigars. So my friend Andrew has a somewhat bullying wife, and he's passive-aggressive with that. It's not healthy. He doesn't express his feelings, resentment builds up in their marriage, etc., etc. Now, for that dynamic to resolve, he needs some space and to do something on his own, but their house isn't big enough. Now, here's some of the fun and interesting things that happened when Andrew started smoking 1 to 3 cigars several times a week. His wife, of course, hates cigars. So when he goes out and smokes, she doesn't join him, so he has his own space. He's now got windows several times a week of 2 or 3 hours of space. In this time, he develops as an individual, not because of the cigar, but because of the space. But the space wouldn't be there in this particular situation without the cigar. Now, add to that, he starts meditating and discovering his joy of meditation. So he goes out, smokes a bit, and meditates for 20 minutes and does his personal work. So his growth is going up. He's worried about his teeth, so he takes better care of his teeth than he did before. He actually starts dental flossing, etc., to counteract the cigar. So his teeth quality goes up. His marriage improves. His spirituality and meditation improve. And to top it off, without his wife hovering around him, he develops male friendship with myself and another man. Now, these male friendships lead to a flurry of growth, and they only happen on cigar night. Meaning, I call and he's not out having cigars. Like, no, I'm watching a movie with my wife. They happen on cigar night. 1, 2, 3, 4-hour conversations about a whole range of topics. His learning goes up. Possibilities goes up. He's doing a money-losing activity, which, we coach him on, and, money losses go down a bit. There are very few areas of his life which were not indirectly and profoundly touched by his choice to smoke cigars. And then he got worried about his health, gave up the cigar smoking, and the entire thing stopped working. Friendships collapsed, poor care of his teeth, passive aggressiveness with his wife. Cigar smoking was the most important thing in his life in terms of the pivot that led to all kinds of indirect positive things. Now, the situation on my own. I like to keep Andrew introduced me to cigars. I saw how they were transforming his life. And I also, as someone that loves to cook, I was interested in the way that smoke affects the palate. And so, so Andrew introduced me not only to cigars, but to scotch, which I don't drink. So I sip, swill, and spit. A little bit like a wine taster. Only whatever the alcoholic beverage, I sip, swill, and spit, and have a smoke, whatever, and enjoy the palate on different tastes and things. Maybe I'll have it with some chocolate, some fresh raspberries, and things like that. So, and I found that there were a number of locations that, because our culture has compartmentalized smoking, there is now what is experienced as a smokers club, meaning the designated area for smoking in a number of locations is now the most probable place to have a warm, relaxed, meaningful interaction with a stranger. So if I'm staying at a hotel and don't know anyone, or I'm staying at a spa and don't know anyone, or a public hot tub and don't know anyone, and there's a smoking area, that's where 80% of the meaningful interaction for me is going to take place. So I don't always smoke. But if I sit down in the smoking area, that's where the interaction is going to take place. And so we're looking at an ecological paradigm of thinking here. In other words, you now have to weigh the harm to the lungs against the health of the body of engaging. Exactly what's going on in this video right now. The harm to the body, and that I'm staying up a little bit later because I just had the idea of this video. And it's 2 a.m. So this video is taking me deeper into fatigue on one level. But it's also taking me deeper into this idea, deeper into my joy. I'm enjoying this immensely. Deeper into my creativity, you see? There's a cost for everything. And it's not about the lineal line. It's about the ecological impact overall, how it's going to affect this, that, and the other. So this is something that I think is very important to understand because, golfing or not golfing or smoking or not smoking or hot tubbing or traveling to this country or having this particular friend or having 4-hour conversations once a week with one person, whatever the choice is, or doing 2-hour therapy sessions, or sandwiching things, where you have, 1 day of therapy followed by a day of energy integration, followed by a massage, a triage of healing that could exponentially increase the effects of all three. The therapy stirs things up, or the energy worker stirs things up. The therapy integrates it in the mind, and the massage integrates it in the body. And then you go back to the energy worker, you see. It's a synergy. And that's one of the things I fiddled with my 6-hour years, where I was doing 6 hours a week of different therapies, is what's the right pairing? And again, I'm completely on my own in this. I can't even explain to the one energy worker what the therapist said. I can't explain to the therapist what the energy worker said. The masseuse isn't interested or doing any of it. So what we're dealing with is a very crude level of paradigm here, in which there are technologies that have undeniable influence of an unspecified nature. And it's very important to understand that, because let's take acid and alkaline. I'm a gardener, so you do a soil pH. And there are certain plants that might like a 6.5 on the pH scale, certain plants that might like a 7, certain plants that might like an 8, certain plants that like 5. My point is, whatever the soil is, either acid or alkaline is medicinal for a given plant, depending on what it needs. So whoever you are and wherever you want to go, a given medicine is medicinal or toxic. Now, that brings me to another issue, which is the dose. Now, human beings are medicinal. This is medicine right here. Now, is this medicine that is balancing you or unbalancing you? And in what way? Because when you have change, when you walk, you create unbalance and then lean into it, and then unbalance and lean into it, and that's how you create momentum. But are you walking in the direction you want to go? And one of the variables here is dose. And one of the things that a number of people have told me personally is that 1 to 2.5 hours is like an explosion, an epiphany. This awareness and that awareness, etc. And so in the ideal flow of, these people, they would spend 1, 2, maybe 3 hours with me a month. And then they digest and integrate and think about and talk about this with this friend and that with that friend. And, and after about a month, they'd be ready for another dose. But 4 to 6 hours at a sitting, overwhelming, indigestible, a little tense. You see, so dose is part of the question of medicine or toxicity. Belladonna, you use it in certain situations to help a heart, and you increase the dose and it'll kill you. A number of drugs, salt, a little bit, you need a certain amount for your health. Too much, it'll kill you. Too little, it'll kill you. If you don't get enough salt, it'll kill you. Too much, it'll kill you. So dosage is very, very important. Now, here's why it's important. If you were exposed to salt by the cupload, hey, you should try this salt. You open your mouth, they pour a cupload of salt in, you gag, you cough it up, it tastes foul in a concentrated state. Get that salt away from me. Are you trying to kill me? I want nothing to do with that salt. Normal reaction. You take a man, you take a woman. You spend a weekend together, get that person away from me. Or you spend a month together, or you spend 6 hours together, whatever it is, there's a dose at which someone is going to be toxic. There's a dose at which a country is going to be toxic. There's a dose at which a paradigm is going to be toxic. A hobby is going to be toxic. There is a dose. And there's a dose where it is going to be medicinal. Now, there's some things, for example, if you're a masculine chauvinist and your feminine is hurting under the burden of your own chauvinism, being around another masculine chauvinist when you're in that state, you're already in a toxic lean too far this way. So even a little bit that leans you a little further is not likely to be medicinal. So there's an ecological component. But what I learned from this is that it's more important when assessing individuals to consider the type of engagement that would be medicinal and the dose than it is, to a certain extent, who you engage with. In other words, your favorite author might be incredibly inspirational, reading 1 to 2 pages a day just before going to bed. But having them do an all-nighter with you, in which you stay up all night talking and they're furiously writing in, the way they think before writing a book, could completely disorient you. So it's not about the person, it's about the dose. So this is another area of learning. And like so many of these things, the reason I'm making this video is that nobody explained any of this to me. No one said, don't pay attention to who you go see, pay attention to the dose. No one said, when everyone said, oh, I saw this healer, you've got to see this healer. No one said that everyone leans a certain direction and they're going to be medicinal if they balance you out, and they're going to be toxic if they add to your lean. So in other words, it's not on some level even about the healer. It's about the ecological relationship between that healer and you. And as I wrap this up, I want to just close with an invitation to complexity, an invitation to paradox, an invitation to use common sense, and to think in terms overall of balance, health, and well-being. Sometimes the most unbalanced thing in our entire lives is the drain and the incredible asymmetry in our time of spending 8 to 10 hours commuting, preparing for, dressing for, and spending time at work. And when you spend 8 to 10 hours or more a day, it doesn't matter necessarily what the work is. It may be so out of alignment with the entirety of ourself that it wouldn't matter what the job is, just getting a 4-hour-a-week job, a part-time job, and changing life accordingly with all the ripple effects that that entails. That could be the most balancing and healing dynamic. And that when you're already spending 8 to 10 hours a day on job-related things, to then make appointments with healers to further take you away from your family, is moving that structured time ratio from spontaneous and organic social time ratio too far in the same direction. And that the number one thing is not to add something, but to actually reduce something so that there's more space. A balance between structured time and spontaneous time. A balance between sound bites and deep dives. Shallow thinking and deep thinking. And with that, thank you for your attention, your quality of time. And I will see you in another world.